Shalom lachlam, Jahuich, Aloha kakao apo. Hello everybody. Without language, we would have no voice. Without language, we would have no poetry, movies, books, fairy tales, or songs. These three introductions I gave a moment ago represent the three outcomes of language revitalization: successful, failed, and ongoing. So many cultures have lost significant parts of their culture through the loss of language, but there is hope. So how can language revitalization bring back a culture's voice? Let's look at an example of successful language revitalization. Hebrew stopped being spoken as a common tongue around the 4th century CE. Hebrew had, however, been kept alive as a religious language, similar to Latin today. However, with the push for an independent Jewish state after World War II, a common tongue had to be chosen. Eliezer ben Yehuda is commonly known as the father of modern Hebrew, and he laid out 7 steps to language revitalization that were then documented by Sarah Molay for the University of Washington Center for Jewish Studies. Number 1 is speaking Hebrew in the family to create a connection between the speakers and their language. Number 2 is to call on Jews around the world to learn Hebrew to create a common Jewish identity no matter where in the world. Number 3 is to establish a Hebrew-speaking society, in this case being the Republic of Israel. Number 4 was to establish Hebrew-only schools to raise a new generation of Hebrew speakers. Number 5 was to establish Hebrew language newspapers, to create a Hebrew dictionary, and to establish a Hebrew language council. These steps are to standardize and legitimize the language for any new learners around the world. Proficiency in Hebrew was made a de facto requirement to function in society, as it is the sole language of administration and culture in Israel. The modern Hebrew language has allowed the Israelis to establish a legitimate nation-state and culture which would not have been possible without the unifying nature of a common tongue. Hebrew allows the Israelis to take control of their own culture and voice for the first time since the 4th century CE. Now that we've seen a successful attempt at language revitalization, let's look at what happens when things go wrong. Let's look at an example of failed language revitalization. According to Canadian linguist Andrew Carney in his 1998 work, Modern Irish, a case study on language revival failure, there is very strong support for revitalization efforts for the Irish language, with most being fully behind government support for the language. Irish is in fact the primary official language of the Republic of Ireland. The Irish government, however, only reports about 80,000 fluent Irish speakers, less than the population of Green Bay, Wisconsin, and with most speakers being older than 50. Many view the language as a limiting factor in life, and that Irish monolingualism keeps one stuck in the so-called Gaeltacht, or linguistic prison that stops one from entering the global world. Many monolingual English-speaking Irish students are sent to Irish immersion school to learn Irish, or at the minimum are subject to Irish language class in school. This backfired as learning Irish became somewhat of a torturous and undesirable requirement for many students. Government administration also remained in English. This is the cardinal error made. In Israel, in order to go to the post office, you need to speak Hebrew. However, in Ireland, English is all you need to get by. This has led to the decline in understanding among the young Irish population of their historical epics, cultural tales, and non-Anglophone traditions. This supports the Irish trend towards the foreign British Anglophone voice instead of their native Irish voice. But if language revival is so difficult yet so important, what's being done today to revive native languages? Let's look at an example of ongoing language revitalization. After the American military occupation of the Kingdom of Hawaii in 1893, English was made the sole language of education. Speaking Hawaiian was forbidden in public and school. Any child caught speaking Hawaiian at school would be physically punished. There are even reports of teachers visiting students' homes to physically threaten parents for speaking Hawaiian with their children. According to Paul Nahua Lucas, Senior Counsel for the Education Legal Division at the Kamehameha Schools and a former enforcement attorney for the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission, children of non-conforming parents could be taken by CPS on baseless claims of child abuse, often amounting to nothing more than smoking in the home, and the children would be sent to English-only boarding schools. According to linguists Mark Warschauer, Keola Dodi, and Hele Koa'omo, since the 1990s there's been a renaissance of the Hawaiian language through immersion schools after the legalization of non-English primary education in 1978. The cultural identity of leoki, or powerful voice, has encouraged many to find self-empowerment through the learning of their native language. In 1978, the number of Hawaiian language learners at the University of Hawaii at Manoa stood at 27. Today that number is 1,277 students, with today about 1,400 young students currently being educated with Hawaiian as their first language. If Hawaiian can be revived to the point of becoming a dominant language, the Hawaiians will have control of their own voice for the first time since it was took from them in 1898. If Hawaiian is successful, it will show the United States and every other country that language revival is possible in the modern age. I'd like to leave you today with the main idea that language is the direct groundwork for a unified cultural voice. And whether successful, failed, or ongoing, it is extremely important to recognize the importance of a language to the people who speak it.